I'd like to welcome everybody here this morning for this presentation from the Australian Cobotics Centre. I know we've got a number of guests here today, so you're very welcome, and to my normal colleagues as well. So my name's Greg Hearn. I am the co-leader of Program 5 in the Australian Cobotics Centre, which is the Future Manufacturing Workforce program, and we're here today to tell you about some preliminary research that we've been doing, and also then to tell you a little bit about the program and take any questions. So I think without any further ado, I will dive into this. Excellent. Okay, so I'm presenting this on behalf of my other colleagues, Penny Williams and Melinda Laundon, and this is really some preliminary findings from pilot research that we've been doing here in Queensland, and comprises two studies that are related and sort of form an ecosystem of the kind of advanced manufacturing companies and sector that we are trying to make sense of. So the first study involved two manufacturing companies and interviews with their managers, and then in addition to that, we spoke to a number of general people in the sector, educational innovation hubs and other policy experts and other key people who have an oversight of the whole sector. In addition, through our partnership with Weld Australia, who is a member of the ACC, we conducted a survey, and of course we've been doing our own desktop review of all of the stats and reports that are out there. So just a little bit of context. Up until 2019, in Australia, no one was really interested in manufacturing, unless you were in the manufacturing sector, and then you were very interested in it because Australia had been blessed with a manufacturing sector that employed a lot of people and was a very important part of the economic landscape in Australia. But over the decades from the 70s through to, let's say, the noughties, Australia's manufacturing sector had been in decline. And but then with COVID, manufacturing has to some degree seized the limelight in many respects because of many factors, but perhaps the most important was that many of the essential items that were required for the pandemic we no longer made, and you'll recall those shortages at the beginning. And so that there's been a lot of investment and a lot of policy interest in manufacturing. And so today Australia's manufacturing is about 6% of GDP. It's had a slight uptick in the last year or so in terms of employment and in terms of growth, and you can see some of the important stats there. So in terms of what I think the current conversation would be, if you talk to people who were in manufacturing, which our research team does, particularly through our partner, the Advanced Robotics Manufacturing Hub, most manufacturers will tell you that there are a number of trends that are important to understand what is happening, and these are trends that really have been different to what you would have seen even 3 or 4 years ago. So there's an increase in vertical integration. In other words, companies trying to control as much of their upstream and downstream requirements as they can themselves. Onshoring back to Australia, the actual labour components has been a feature of the last few years as well. But at the same time, there are supply chain limitations that are meaning that there are challenges to being able to grow in the way that Australian manufacturing would need to. And there's two other key factors. There's been a lot of government grants that have been available over the last 2 years, and companies need access to capital to grow. But often the feedback is that these government grants are time consuming, both in terms of how long it takes to get the money, but also in terms of the administrative access. Technology is a big factor in manufacturing, and advanced manufacturing is about that journey. But that doesn't mean there's a straightforward path to being able to adopt it. So that gives you some context. The other thing in the conversation in the media in particular at the moment is that there is a huge challenge around labour supply in Australia as well. And there are many companies who are crying out for particular skills that they just can't source. And this is not only in the regions where this can be a big problem, but this is also in the urban areas as well. And 75% of Queensland's manufacturing sector is in southeast Queensland. And there are a number of associated factors. The migration debate that you will hear a lot in the media is a big issue, just the amount of time it's taking to process skilled migration, not just in manufacturing, but in other key roles such as nursing and health and so forth. But also, of course, there is competition for interstate skilled labour, and there's been massive interstate skilled migration that everyone would be aware of in relation to a lot of that being from COVID. There are labour shortages, not just in the emerging digital jobs, but many of the traditional trades, particularly in the regional area, are also experiencing labour shortages. And so this is some of the context setting that we were very mindful of as we were doing our interviews with the companies that we talked to, and also our survey. Some of the findings from our survey we're going to go through now. Labour shortages that I mentioned, and skill development is a key thing that just about everybody in the sector is aware of. And as I said before, there are emerging kinds of jobs, and a lot of people who you would like to attract into the manufacturing sector are just not aware of the breadth of career possibilities in manufacturing. It's still seen as dumb, dirty and dangerous, but with digitisation, which has swept through all sectors, there are many digital roles in manufacturing that people are just not aware of, and some you can see there as well. Implication of this is that there are changing skill sets required. Digital skills are very important. Digital skills across the board, and so coding of course, but just an appreciation of how different digital systems interface with each other, and a general digital literacy cannot be assumed in many manufacturing companies. In addition to that, problem solving and innovation is important, because if you're going to be adopting these new digital technologies, then you need to be able to engage in innovation and recognize the application and adaptation of these technologies, which is essentially a problem solving kind of skill that's required. So another feedback about these skills, as I said, traditional skills not there either in some regions, but in terms of the educational pathways, are we producing job-ready graduates? And the view from most people we talk to in industry is that we're not. How do we attract and retain workers? A very strong finding is that there is this massive public imaginary that automation equals job loss or job insecurity, and that robots are taking our jobs. As much as a lot of our case studies demonstrated that that's not the fact, many people and a lot of the media around this is reinforcing the idea that robots will actually take my jobs, and that trade and craft skills will be lost and undervalued. And you can understand why this is many countries around the world actually have a very clear manufacturing policy, which is actually about substituting labour for machines. And we've got a couple of 100 years where technology adoption has led to displacement of labour, starting with agriculture. So it's understandable that people will have these fears. It's not just a fearful fantasy. But as I said, in many case studies in Australia, we've found that this is not the case. Adoption of robotics under the right business model can actually lead to growth of workforce in the company. And we'll talk a bit more about that as we go through. So the corollary of that is that there's a fear of learning and using new technologies, and will I have the skills that it takes to dive into these new digital technologies that are coming at the sector fast. It's not a simple thing, however, that robots will be easily adopted and it will simply displace labour. So a lot of the managers that we've spoken to express the views that the adoption of robotics is not simple. And we've found some robots sitting in the corner that simply don't know how to be used or set up or integrated into the production process. So for manufacturers, there is a real need for trusted third parties to educate and help with the transition and adaptation of new technology. It's a very important part of what the Australian Cobotics Centre actually does. So, as I said, what are we going to do about some of these issues? Starting with attraction and retention of workers, we need to basically address some of the misperceptions of manufacturing jobs through education and communication kinds of activities. Particularly, I think, case studies of some of the leading edge adopters of technology, which we've been helping to develop, and getting those examples out there into industry. Reducing the fear, removing the fear of insecurity and reduced employment and actual job loss is a really important element of what we're doing in this workforce, future manufacturing workforce program. And we'll talk a bit more about some of our projects in a minute. So reskilling, retraining and redeployment, obviously that's necessary, but it's easier said than done. So what are the exact systems and pathways that we need? And there's another big opportunity in diversifying the workforce because a large part of the manufacturing workforce is aging and also is male. So diversifying the workforce through increased participation of women and reducing the barriers to their participation is very important strategy, as is increasing the diversification in terms of ethnicity and other kinds of people that are often ruled out because of a disability or some other factor. So what are the strategies we need for diversity and inclusion? In terms of developing skills, what are we going to do? So we need to really have a look at education industry partnerships, have a think about on-the-job learning and how that is combined with formal learning, and what kinds of qualifications and learning modes educational institutions, both at the VET and university level can actually provide. There's a need for innovation in modes of learning and access to learning, and the kinds of accreditation that is attractive to people in the industry and achievable in the industry. Professional associations are an important part of this, and that includes, I would say that includes unions as well, and because they have an important investment in education of their members in different trades. people coming into the sector through secondary school and through university and vet are important to work with as well, and to make sure that's integrated with all kinds of upskilling and new models of on-the-job training, particularly, for example, trades working with digital professions, mechatronics or other key professional services, people who can provide the digital training and solve real on-the-job problems. Communicating the vision of Industry 4.0 is very important. So, as I said, there's a widespread fear and there's a widespread ingrained perception that the only thing that robots will do is take people's jobs. It's a very important strategy for us to think about how we challenge that embedded, taken for granted set of assumptions and social imaginary of what the future of work is going to be like in advanced manufacturing. And starting with workers and doing project with workers that demonstrate the adoption of technologies and show how different business models can combat and refute the idea that just because you use a robot doesn't mean to say that that is going to take your job. And particularly cobots, collaborative robotics, is an opportunity where the deployment of robots is all about working with workers in the same space as workers, having workers reprogram and program the cobots to help them do jobs, implementing cobotics into work teams. So that's why within the Australian Cobotics Centre, our challenge in the Future Manufacturing Workshop is very much about understanding the social structure of work practices. Is it in a team? And working with workers to show them how the cobot as a tool can be understood just like any other tool, and can also be understood as an intelligent part of the work team and the production process. So there are some very interesting work that we're starting to do around that. But the key idea is make workers central in the business model. Business models can reshore, they can upskill, they can grow new revenue streams, they can create high value products. And when you do all of those things, you need workers with higher skills working side by side with trade workers who are also being upskilled. And that's a very good news story, provided we know how to implement that kind of business model and how to communicate that. The impact on jobs is not uniform. And I just wanted to share this model of a way of thinking about jobs with the adoption of robotics and cobotics in particular, as just a way of thinking about the fact that we need to be very specific when we're talking about a particular job pathway. And you think about the assumption that robots and cobots will take jobs. It's a very broad brush and not very nuanced understanding of what economists know about the impact of technology on particular sectors. So there's been, for at least 100 years, a lot of research in economics and labor economics around technology and jobs. And I like this model by Ben Vermeulen and his colleagues around the impact of automation on employment. And this was particularly around robots. And the question was, is it just the same structural change? And their argument was that this taxonomy can help you make sense of it. So for any technology, you have the sector that actually makes the technology. So in our example, that's the sector that makes robots or cobots. Then you have the applying sector, which is the sector that is actually adapting those cobots. So in our case, that's manufacturing. Then you have complementing sectors, and they are the sectors that are the best example are the upstream and downstream supply chains of the manufacturing sectors. And then you have the spillover sectors, and the best example of that are the services that make the technology adoption possible. So, for example, robot integrators. And then within each of those sectors, you have existing jobs, transforming jobs, and brand new jobs. So it gives us sort of a taxonomy of 12 different types of jobs and the implications of all those different evolutionary pathways. Is that with labour migration and transition, upskilling, there will be all kinds of different career opportunities for workers, and the fact that pathways can be plotted through those different elements of the taxonomy, with workers moving in and out, up and down, to have a career that is not going to disappear anytime soon. So just quickly then about our work program and the projects in program 5. We actually have 4 project streams within program 5. So the future workforce, skills and security. So definitely been talking about that today. So I think you've got a good idea about that. Manufacturing jobs of the future. As I said, there are brand new jobs that we can see already in companies, and but also expect to have new jobs going forward as well. And a lot of these jobs don't even have names yet. But if you look at some of the case studies that we've done, you have games designers working in manufacturing as a digital integration officer for the production process, using AR and VR to help understand the workflow and the inputs and outputs at each stage. These are the kind of jobs that would not even been thought about 10 years ago. As I said before, there's a big task in communicating and managing change in relation to manufacturing. And so this is managerial, but it's also at new forms of leadership right through the organisation. It's about growing the diversity of leadership, working with women moving into leadership positions, and bringing in new leaders from other sectors, some of those complementary or applying kinds of sectors. We're finding that there are managerial transitions across those different sectoral interfaces, and this is something that we want to explore further and do more research on. And then a whole program on diversity and longevity of the manufacturing workforce, and that's really important as well. And we're going to be looking at doing some detailed qualitative work to understand why the workforce and diversity issues are the way they are, and also to be what can be done about that, and how can we attract a wider pool of candidates for careers and satisfying and secure work going into the future. Okay, so I hope you've enjoyed that presentation. I've rushed through it. We would like to have the opportunity now to discuss with you what issues resonate with you and what's missing. Well, what's messy is a lot of things, but what's missing is what I meant to say. And so I'm going to stop the screen share now, and I'll welcome any questions from anyone, either in the chat or as a comment.
Well, I'm happy to kick the ball going, Greg. I think that's a very good presentation indeed. I could spend a long time discussing with you a lot of those points, but I think just maybe a couple. I think from from an industry perspective, multi-skilling is now becoming absolutely critical. So the shortage of labour means that welders are being trained on CNC machines and vice versa. And that's come about particularly because of COVID, where you don't know how many people you're going to get on a shift, and you need to increase the flexibility of your workforce in order to continue production. The biggest issue I found, and I've been on a pretty extensive tour of the country over the last few weeks, is that people just don't understand what a cobot is. They get extremely confused between a robot and a cobot. And so I always spend some time talking to people about it, but they still can't get their mind around something which is quite, medium-sized and works with a person, compared with something which is in a great big cage. And I think it's incumbent, certainly we're working on it, to try and educate fabricators on exactly what a cobot is and how it works. I guess the final thing is the idea of cobots or robots replacing workers. I'm just amazed that anybody thinks that anymore, and not because of the detailed academic research that people have done, but most companies are currently working at between 30 and 50% capacity, because they literally don't have the people to deliver on the work that they're doing. And I'm sure everybody realizes we're about to hit the biggest increase in manufacturing that this country's ever seen. I think that we'll easily double or even treble our contribution to GDP over the next 10 years. And I say that because one of the things which hasn't been widely publicized but is extremely important is the amount of fabrication and welding there's going to be in the renewables, move to renewables. I can't remember off the top of my head how many wind towers we're going to need, or how many. I know we need 10,000 kilometers of transmission on the eastern coast, which is a lot of transmission towers. And then there's any hydrogen plants that we end up building, but it's a huge amount of fabrication that's going to be required. And I had a meeting with the major power companies week before last, and they pointed out that when we moved post-war into our current grid, it took 50 years to establish the grid and the power supply and everything else. And now we're planning to do an exercise at least as big in 10 years. And that's going to take an enormous amount of industrial capability that we haven't had since the last war. So huge issues. And I will just pass on an amusing thing, which I met with the South Australian Minister for Skills last night and gave him the good news. And he hadn't even thought about the impact of renewables on the economy in South Australia and the ability to deliver on this stuff. So that's really all from me, Greg. I think it's well done. Yeah, it's good.
Thanks very much, Jeff. Yeah, I echo that, the point that the fear of robots taking a job is just that. It's sort of embedded in the social imaginary. And I think to be fair as well, there are some countries that are still pursuing a maximum automation approach, and Singapore would be one of those. But certainly in Australia, we have labour shortages, and the idea that currently they're absolutely urgent. And it's funny that you mentioned about the new energy impact, because I was in a facilitating a workshop on Tuesday with a very, very big steel fabricator, and the whole workshop was about, okay, so what for steel products in the era of hydrogen and solar and wind. And you're right, the implications are massive. And it's really interesting because there's an opportunity to make some very smart products within that as well. So not just transmission steel, but actually to how you maintain that in a very smart way. And so that's where digitization and services come into this as well. And so I agree with you. We're looking at a huge opportunity there, and it's a very exciting one. So thanks for those comments.
Greg, it's Penny.
Hi.
I'll just draw your attention to, there's a comment by Paul in the chat.
Yep.
And then I think Melissa Nugent also has her hand up, so she might have a question.
Yep.
Hi, I do have a question. Melissa Nugent from Advanced Robotics for Manufacturing Hub, partner in the centre, and really excited about this work. I just wonder what your initial comments might be from the feedback you've had so far. Large companies use their big brands and big dollars to attract the next generation of workers. What's the current thinking or the models, or what are you exploring around what can SMEs do, given that more than 99% of manufacturing's SMEs, to tap into what that next generation is looking for in terms of their aspiration?
I think there's actually two things the next generation is looking for, where SMEs are well placed to be very competitive. And one is a dedication to changing the planet and to doing something that actually makes a difference. That's a huge driver. So sometimes large companies aren't as agile around moving into those new agendas, and they're stuck with legacy technologies that mean it's very hard for them to move as quickly as an SME can. The second one, I think, is just the opportunity for SMEs is just to dive right in and be very agile and very experimental, adopting new technologies and services, because I think people who are well trained want an opportunity to use their skills and to do exciting, innovative work. So I would say, in my experience, since starting off, starting the Arm Hub over the last 3 or 4 years, we're seeing some SMEs who are really offering really exciting work and don't have a problem with recruiting people. Whereas the SMEs that do tend to be stuck a little bit in a technology or a mindset, or sometimes it's regional as well, and they're missing out on that opportunity because they can't take that step into being innovative and agile. And so I think the little guys have got a real competitive advantage in the labour market if they want to rise to it. And I just want to go back to Paul's comment here. So we've been seeing, not only in relation to robotics in manufacturing, but the integration of multiple types of digital labour across industry. So regarding missing, in addition to addressing the fear of job insecurity, there's a huge benefit to develop a culture of hybrid human digital workforce capability. Simple example of a benefit is that if a robot goes down, it adds work to the rest of the workforce, similar in a way that the human is sick. This can lead to a much more positive appreciation of the role of digital labour contributed by employees. Yeah, look, I agree with that. And I think some of the very notable companies that we've worked with so far, they do have this kind of, they're recruiting, I would say, digital native generation people who are very flexible in the way that they can apply their digital skills. They're very aware of all kinds of everything from software to systems to mechatronics and devices. They have a lot of capabilities to be redeployed across different aspects of the business. So I totally agree with that. I think that is going to be the nature of, if you think about my matrix there, sectors and jobs, we're going to have a very deployable and redeployable culture, human, technology, hybrid kind of workforce that is very agile and very capable of being redeployed. So yeah, thanks for that comment, Paul. That's right on the money.
Perhaps I can add to that, Greg, and I apologise everyone for my kind of croaky voice. That's certainly a remit of the centre, Paul, is to really think about collaborative robotics are part of the workforce. And so how does that change the design of the workplace, the culture of the workplace, the way that leadership gets the workforce on board with the use of technology, various forms of technology. And so I think collectively as a centre, we're looking at all of those different aspects beyond just, program 5. And I'd also kind of add to Melissa and Jeff's points about, what can SMEs do and why do we still experience this fear? I would make a point that this is a relatively small pilot study, and these are issues we've heard before and they're emerging within that study. And what we really want to do is get deeper to understanding why these issues are occurring and what really can be done. So, for example, we know that a fear of technology is often not driven just by the technology itself. It's, there are systemic issues that might be causing that are related to the economy or person's sense of income security or other factors. And so getting a better understanding of what workers really think helps us then to inform how we can overcome that. And similarly, we can see, we've already seen, as Greg pointed to, some really fantastic work that's happening in SMEs to attract workers to the sector. But that is going to vary from location to location, from regional to urban, but even within, regional centres and different types of manufacturing. So one of the things we want to understand is what does attract young people? Really, we've got some anecdotal information, we've got very preliminary insights, but the more we can learn about that and the more we can understand about why they're starting apprenticeships but not completing them, the more we can actually address what's occurring there, and we can weave cobotics into that process as part of, understanding what the future of manufacturing is really going to look like and painting that picture more broadly. But that's all my voice will allow me to stand on the soapbox for. So
thanks, Penny. I think that's really helpful. Look, we're right up against time, so I wanted to just thank everybody for participating. And please reach out to us if you have issues or you want to engage us in some way. We're looking for companies that are interested in helping us solve some of these problems and learning from what we're doing here in the Cobotics Centre with our great industry partners that we've got on board already. So I hope you found this session interesting. So thanks very much, and enjoy the rest of your day. And if you see a robot or a cobot, so get to know them. There's nothing to be afraid of. And as I say, thanks very much for attending. So all the best.